The wind came down off the ridgeline like it meant to skin the earth bare. It howled low through the gnarled pion and sent a ripple through the grass that had long since dried to the color of old parchment. Snow clung stubbornly to the shaded slopes, but the sun had no warmth in it. Beneath the sky's wide, pale emptiness a man rode. His coat was patched at the elbows, the sleeves stiff with old sweat. The brim of his hat had curled from too many seasons under hard sun and hard rain. He looked like something shaped by the land itself, worn lean and silent. The mare beneath him limped slightly, favoring her left foreleg. He hadn't named her. You didn't name things you might have to let go of. He rode with no destination but away from the house he'd boarded up last spring, from the field that wouldn't grow nothing but thistle now. The bank had taken the last of it. Not that there'd been much left. Just a stack of unpaid notes, a lean-to barn, and the echo of his father's voice saying things like, "Be a man, and it's your land now." The road cut through a shallow valley where wind and time had carved the rocks into twisted shapes. There were old stories about places like this, bones buried deep, things better left quiet. But he didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in distance, in keeping on until whatever pain you carried wore out and fell behind you. Up ahead the buzzard circled low. He slowed the mare. At first he thought it was a pile of clothes, maybe something fallen off a cart, but as he got closer he saw the faint movement. One of them raised its head. 3 children, curled tight around their mother like she was a dying fire they could still draw heat from. The oldest, a girl, couldn't have been more than 8. Her hair was matted with dust, her cheeks streaked raw. The 2 younger boys clung to her, their faces blank with the kind of tired that went deeper than sleep. The woman, he wasn't sure if she was alive until he saw the flutter of breath through her lips. He sat there for a moment, reins loose in his hands, staring down at them like maybe they'd vanish if he blinked. The girl stared back, not asking, not pleading, just waiting to see what kind of man he was. He got down slow. His knees cracked when his boots hit the dirt. He knelt beside the woman and touched 2 fingers to her throat. Her skin was cold, but the pulse was there. Weak, but there. There was a place up the hill, an old trapper's shack, mostly roof, and not much else. He had passed it yesterday, or maybe the day before. Time got loose out here. "You walk?" he asked the girl. She nodded. He looked at the younger ones. One of the boys had no shoes. The other coughed a sound like gravel in a tin pan. He wasn't going to make it long out here. He stood, pulled his bedroll from the saddle and wrapped the woman in it. Lifted her into the saddle. She didn't stir. He led the horse, the girl walking beside him, her small hand clamped around one of the boy's wrists to keep him upright. The other boy clung to her skirt. It was a slow climb. The wind kept trying to pull them backward. Snow stung their cheeks in flurries, and the light had that look to it like the sun was already halfway gone, even if it was only late afternoon. By the time they reached the shack, the woman's skin had gone blue at the edges. He laid her on the dirt floor, started a fire with the last of the kindling he'd stashed days ago. The smoke drifted up through the cracks in the roof. It wasn't warm, not really, but it was better than the wind. He poured a little water into a tin cup and held it to her mouth. Her lips parted, but she didn't drink. The girl took off her shawl and tucked it around one of the boys. She didn't speak. Neither did he. There was a silence between them, bigger than the room, older than either of them. The kind of silence that held too much. He didn't ask where they'd come from. He could guess. This land was full of stories that ended the same way. As night settled in, the wind whistled through the boards like a voice trying to speak. The fire cracked low. The mare stood just outside, head down, steam rising off her flanks. The woman stirred once, a faint groan, then went still again. He sat with his back to the wall, watching the children. The girl was awake, eyes shining in the firelight. She looked like she hadn't cried in a long time, like maybe crying had stopped working. "You got a name?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She nodded once. "Mabel." He nodded back like that was all he needed to know. The morning came quiet, blanketed in a pale frost that rimmed the edges of the broken windows and turned every breath into smoke. The woman had not woken. She lay wrapped in his bedroll, cheeks, sunken hands curled like fallen leaves. He'd put a damp cloth on her head in the night, though it hadn't helped much. Mabel sat near the fire, her arms around the two boys. One of them whimpered in his sleep. The other stared into the flames, not blinking. He stepped outside. The sky had turned the color of steel, flat and pitiless. He scanned the hills, listening. No wagons. No riders. Just wind threading through the dry grass and the slow clomp of the mare shifting her weight. The trapper's shack had no food. He'd known that. Still, he checked the corners, rattled the old wood box beneath the bunk. Nothing but mouse droppings and splinters. He was down to half a biscuit and a chunk of jerky in his saddlebag. He tore the biscuit into pieces and gave the children each a part. Mabel didn't take hers right away. She looked to her mother first. "She won't eat," the girl whispered. "She needs rest," he said, though he wasn't sure anymore. He gave the jerky to the girl, kept nothing for himself. Hunger sat low in his belly like a stone. He was used to it. That didn't make it lighter. Mabel watched him the way folks watched a new horse, quiet, measuring, waiting to see if it'd bolt or bite. He wasn't sure what she saw in him, just that she kept looking. That afternoon he rigged a lean-to from a torn tarp and some sticks behind the shack. Wind wouldn't stop coming. It blew straight through the cracks in the boards, scraping everything clean. He carried in brush and dried weeds, packed the walls to slow the draft. The girl helped. Not with words she didn't ask, but with her hands. She moved like she'd done this before. Like the world had already made her older than she ought to be. When the firewood ran low, he took the axe and walked west toward the trees. The snow hadn't fallen yet, but it would. The ground had that smell, sharp and heavy, like something coming. He chopped for over an hour. The ache in his arms felt honest. By the time he came back, the sun had slipped behind the hill. The mare stood at the edge of the clearing, tail flicking at shadows. Inside, Mabel had pulled her mother closer to the hearth. The woman's face had taken on a waxy sheen. Her breath rasped like it had to drag its way out of her chest. "She needs a doctor," Mabel said. Her voice cracked. "Please." He didn't answer right away. Just stared into the fire, watching the coals pulse. "There's no one for miles. Closest town's maybe 2 days south, and I'd have to ride hard." He met her eyes. "You got anybody there?" She shook her head. "We left everyone." "Why?" She hesitated. "Papa died. Mama said we had to go west. She said we'd find a new start." He nodded slowly. He'd heard that before. West was supposed to fix things. But most times it just spread the wound. He looked over at the mare. She'd make it if he traveled light. Maybe. But if he left them here, they'd freeze. No question. He looked back at the girl, then at the boys curled like puppies near the fire. He didn't say what he was thinking because it would sound cruel, and there wasn't any cruelty in him just then. Instead, he stood, took his coat from the peg, the rifle from beside the door. "I'll hunt," he said. "You keep the fire going." She nodded, her face set like stone. He didn't tell her he was scared. Scared the woman wouldn't last the night. Scared he'd find nothing but snow and silence in the woods. Scared of what it would mean to care. But he walked into the trees anyway, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots crunching over frostbitten leaves. Each step felt like a promise. Not a big one. Just the kind that says, "I ain't leaving. Not yet." Ride deeper into the west. Subscribe now. He brought down a hare just before dusk. Small thing, skinny from winter, but it was meat. He cleaned it by the edge of the creek, the blade of his knife cold as river stone. His fingers had gone numb. The blood steamed in the chill air, dark and thin. Back at the shack, the fire was low but alive. Mabel looked up when he stepped in, her face unreadable. The boys were asleep again, one curled around the other like a mirror. The woman hadn't moved. He strung the hair, skinned it, and spitted it over the fire. The smell was faint, but it filled the room like a memory of something better. Mabel sat cross-legged by the hearth, hands in her lap. He handed her the first cooked piece. She broke it into thirds without a word and pressed the pieces into her brother's small palms. They stirred, barely awake, chewing slow. He saved the best for the woman, lifting her head with one hand, coaxing her to take a bite. She gagged once, but swallowed. Her lips were dry and cracked, but she opened her eyes. Mabel's voice broke into a whisper. "Mama." The woman looked at her daughter, eyes clouded but present. She smiled, barely there, more memory than motion. Then she slept again. For real this time, not the half-dead drift she'd been in. Her breathing was still bad but steadier. He didn't say anything, just added a stick to the fire and leaned against the wall. "You got a name?" the girl asked. Her voice was quiet, careful. He thought about lying, about giving her a name that didn't belong to him. But something about the way she asked made that feel wrong. "Elias," he said. She nodded like that fit. "I'm Mabel. That's Jonah, and that one's Eli. Like you." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Outside, the wind had dropped. A silence settled, the kind that wasn't empty but full. Like the land was holding its breath. Mabel pulled her knees to her chest. "Mama said we'd make it to Oregon. That there was land there and maybe a cousin." "That's a long ride," Elias said. "She thought we'd find work in the towns along the way. But the wagon broke a week ago. We walked till Mama fell." He looked at the fire. "How long you been out there?" "I think 3 days. We stayed with her. I didn't know what else to do." He nodded slowly. "You did right." Mabel looked down. "I thought maybe God forgot us." He didn't answer right away. The fire cracked. The woman stirred in her sleep. "Sometimes he don't show up," Elias said. "Not the way we think. But you're still here." They didn't speak after that. Just let the fire burn, let the quiet settle again. It wasn't peace, but it was something close. Later, when the children were asleep and the woman still breathing, Elias stepped outside. The sky had cleared. Stars spilled across it like ash scattered by the wind. Coal wrapped around him, sharp and clean. He pulled his coat tighter. He didn't know what he was going to do with them. He had no home to take them to, no steady food, no real plan. But he couldn't leave them. That much he knew. He looked up at the stars like he might find a sign there, but all he saw was distance. And maybe that was enough. A kind of truth anyway. Behind him, through the gaps in the shack walls, the firelight flickered. The faint sound of breathing, a little warmth in a big, bitter land. He stood there a while, hat in his hands, bareheaded under the stars. Then he went back inside and closed the door. By the next morning, the woman could sit up. Only just, and with Elias's help, but it was something. Her skin had lost that gray, waxy look. The fever hadn't broken, but her eyes were clearer now, blue dulled by sickness, but alive. She whispered her name when he asked, "Clara." Her voice was the sound of wind through dry grass, soft but real. He gave her the rest of the dried meat and a bit of boiled root he'd dug up on the far ridge. Not much, but enough to keep her from slipping again. Mabel fed her water by the spoonful. Slow, gentle, like she'd done it before. That day Elias worked. The shack wouldn't hold much longer and snow hung heavy in the air waiting. He chopped more wood, tore apart one of the broken stalls out back, and used the boards to brace the walls. Mabel followed him outside, dragging scraps, helping where she could. He let her. She didn't talk much, just watched, learned, and moved like someone who knew time was short. At noon he spotted a shadow in the valley, a coyote thin as a fence rail nosing through the brush. Elias watched it for a while. It didn't see him, just kept moving slow, like everything out here, half starved, half lost. By nightfall they had enough wood to last a few more days. He patched the roof best he could, though snow would still find its way in. It always did. Inside, Clara dozed, wrapped in every blanket they had. Her color was better, her breathing still rough but steadier. The boys slept close to her now, not out of fear but warmth. Mabel sat near the fire, rubbing her hands together. "You got family?" she asked. Elias didn't answer at first, just stared into the flames. "Had a brother once," he said finally. "He went east. Haven't heard from him in 10 years. What about your mama?" He shrugged. "Buried her on a hill near Tucson. Long time back." She nodded like she understood more than a girl her age ought to. Elias leaned back, boots crossed at the ankles, fingers folded in his lap. "You?" he asked. Mabel looked down, picked at a loose thread in her skirt. "Just Mama. Papa got thrown from a mule last spring. We stayed with a preacher's family for a bit. Then Mama said we couldn't stay where people looked at us like that." "Like what?" "Like we were a job to do. A burden." Her voice tightened. "Like we should be grateful every second." Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. "You ain't a burden," he said. "You're just unlucky." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. She blinked them away fast, angry with them. "I don't want to owe anyone," she whispered. "I just want to be enough." He didn't know what to say to that. Nothing seemed right. So he reached over and added a stick to the fire, the gesture slow, steady. Like maybe that was answer enough. Later, when Mabel drifted off beside her brothers, Elias pulled on his coat and stepped outside again. Snow had begun to fall, thin flakes, not yet heavy but persistent. The kind that didn't quit. The land was silent, vast, and waiting. He looked back at the shack. Warm light leaked through the cracks. For a long time that place had meant nothing. Just a ruin, an empty shell of another man's life. Now it held 4 souls. One of them barely clinging, the rest not much better. He'd told himself once he was done helping people, that the world took more than it gave, and the safest thing was distance. But something had shifted. Not loud, not sudden. Just a girl offering food to her brothers before herself. Just a sick woman trying to smile for her child. Just the sound of breathing in the dark. He turned his face to the sky and let the snow settle in his beard. It melted slow, left tracks. Then he went back inside. The snow kept falling. By morning it had laid a pale blanket over everything, softening the edges of the world. The land looked quiet, but Elias knew better. Quiet didn't mean safe. Quiet just meant the hard things were waiting. He broke ice in the creek to fill the canteens. The cold bit deep into his knuckles, but he didn't curse. Cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. Clara sat up against the wall, now bundled in every blanket they could spare. Her skin had some color again, her breath shallow but even. She watched Elias when he moved, not with fear, just wary, like she didn't quite know what he wanted. "I'm not staying long," she said hoarsely, her voice scraped raw. "Soon as I can walk, we'll be gone." Elias didn't look at her. He was cleaning his rifle. "You won't get far in this." She didn't answer. The fire popped. Mabel sat beside her mother, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. The boys played quietly in the corner, stacking bits of wood, making up games without words. Clara's gaze softened as she watched them. Then she looked back to Elias. "You got a family of your own." No, wife, no. You always this talkative. That almost got a smile out of him. Almost. She leaned her head back against the wall. You don't have to keep us. I don't expect nothing. I know. We don't got money, or land, or anything worth trading. I know. Clara studied him. Her eyes were clearer now. Still tired, still rimmed with sickness, but sharp underneath. So why? Elias rubbed his thumb along the rifle stock. The wood was worn smooth in that spot. I don't know, he said. Seemed like you needed help. That's enough. Clara let out a dry breath that might been a laugh. Most men would pass by. Most men ain't got to live with themselves after. That silenced her. Outside the wind had died. Snow still fell, but slower now. The world looked like it was holding its breath again. Elias stood. I'm going to check the traps. He'd set 3 out near the ridge the night before. A long shot, but maybe something small had wandered through. He pulled on his coat and hat, stepped out into the white hush. The traps hadn't caught much, just a half-starved squirrel and tracks where something bigger had gotten wise. Still, he skinned the thing quick and clean. It would stretch a stew. Everything had to. Back at the shack, Clara was asleep again. Mabel stirred the pot over the fire, careful and precise. She glanced up when he came in. I can cook, she said. Mama taught me. He nodded. That's good. She stirred a little longer, then spoke without looking at him. You live out here by yourself? Mostly. You got a house? Had one. What happened? Elias took off his coat, hung it near the fire. Drought. Bad crop. Bank took the land. Mabel nodded like she already knew that story. Maybe she did. She glanced at him again. You could have let us die. Yeah. But you didn't. No. She looked back at the pot. Mama says some men don't do things to be thanked. They just do them because that's who they are. Elias didn't say anything. Just sat by the wall and watched the steam curl off the stew. That night the boys laughed in their sleep. Little snorts and kicks. Dreams, probably. Elias watched them from his spot near the door. Clara coughed now and then, but less than before. Mabel curled up near her mother, a blanket tight around her shoulders. She whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a story. Her voice was soft and steady, the way it might have been in better times beside a real fire with a father still breathing and a roof that didn't leak. Elias listened without meaning to. It settled into him slow and warm, like something he'd lost a long time ago but couldn't name. He sat there long after the fire went low, not guarding, not planning, just staying, because they were still alive. Because the wind had stopped, because maybe, just maybe, something good was starting to take root in the cold. By the 4th day, Clara could stand. Not long, and not without help. Elias had to brace her with one hand at her elbow, while the other steadied her weight, but she stood. Her breath came short and her legs trembled like saplings in wind, but there she was, upright. Alive. She didn't smile exactly. Just nodded slow and firm, like it was a deal struck with her own bones. I'm not dying. Not yet. Elias helped her sit back down by the fire. She gripped his wrist on the way down, her fingers thin and sharp with fever weight. Thank you, she said, quiet. He didn't answer, just eased her back and stoked the flames. Outside the world had gone silver. Snow coated the trees, the trail, the slope behind the shack. It lay smooth and deep, hiding the stones and ruts underneath, softening the hard world without ever changing it. The traps had come up empty again. He wasn't surprised. The animals had holed up. Smart. Elias sat on the stoop, sharpening his knife, slow and steady. The sound of steel on stone was something familiar, something certain. Behind him, he could hear Clara speaking to the children. Her voice was stronger today, though it caught sometimes like the wind catching on a torn piece of cloth. "I think the snow's stopped for good," she said later. "We'll move on tomorrow." He didn't look at her. "You won't make it far. We can't stay." "Why not?" Clara leaned against the doorway. Her face looked older than it had 4 days ago. She rubbed her palms together as if trying to wake them up. "Because you've already done enough." "That ain't a reason." She hesitated, then spoke low. "People talk. Stray woman, 3 kids, staying with a man out in the woods. They'll say things. About me. About you." Elias gave a small, humorless laugh. "Ain't nobody out here to talk?" "You know that don't matter. Word finds a way." He sheathed the knife, stood up slow. "I didn't ask for nothing. Don't expect it now." Clara met his eyes. "I know. That's why I have to go." They were quiet after that. The kind of quiet that sat between people who've both lost too much to risk wanting more. That evening, Mabel helped him mend the broken hinges on the door. Her hands were chapped, her fingers clumsy with cold, but she didn't quit. "You gonna let us leave?" she asked after a long silence. Elias looked at her. She didn't flinch. "That what your mama wants. She says it's safer." He didn't answer, just handed her another nail. She hammered it in with the butt of a rock. Careful, clean, like she'd done it before. "I don't want to leave," she said finally. "It's cold and rough and there ain't much food, but it's better than before." He looked at her then. Really looked. "I ain't got much," he said. She nodded. "You've got enough." That night he lay on the floor near the fire, listening to them breathe. The wind didn't blow. The stars blinked through cracks in the roof. He didn't sleep. In the morning, Clara stood at the door, her satchel-packed coat, 2 thin eyes red from coughing. The boys were wrapped tight in old quilts, Mabel clutching both their hands. They were ready to leave. Elias said nothing. Then he turned, walked to the corner, and opened a small wooden box he'd kept under a floorboard. He hadn't looked at it in years. Inside was a folded paper, yellowed at the edges, a deed long expired. Below that, a locket. And beneath that, a key. He held it out to Clara. "There's a place down near the river," he said. "Small house. My uncle's back before he passed. Roof's better than this. Stove works. Bit of fence still standing." Clara looked at the key. Her lips parted, but no words came. "You don't have to take it," Elias said. "But it's yours if you want it." Mabel's eyes went wide. "Why?" Clara asked, barely above a whisper. Elias shrugged. "Seems you're meant to stay a while." Snow began to fall again, soft as ash, whispering against the roof. The children were still. The fire crackled low. Clara looked at the key, then at Elias. Then she reached out and took it. The house by the river sat crooked on the land, like it had leaned too long into the wind and didn't quite trust its own legs anymore. The boards were grayed with age, the front steps half rotted, but the walls held. Smoke could rise from its chimney again. It was still standing, and out here that counted for a lot. Elias walked ahead, boots crunching through crusted snow, the key cold in his palm. Mabel followed close behind, dragging a sled he'd built from broken boards and salvaged rope. Her brothers rode piled in quilts, faces red from the air, but laughing, real from the gut laughter that rose up like something long buried, shaking off the dirt. Clara brought up the rear, walking slow but steady. Her coat flapped in the wind, thin as ever, but her spine was straight. She didn't speak, just watched the house get closer. Her face was unreadable. Inside, the place smelled like dry wood and mice. Elias set about cleaning first thing, knocking cobwebs off the beams, sweeping out the corners. Mabel opened every drawer, every cupboard like she expected treasure and seemed just as pleased when she found nothing but dust. The boys found an old tin pail and spent half an hour turning it into a drum. Clara sat by the stove, eyes closed, hands folded in her lap. By nightfall the house was warmer. Not warm exactly, but less bitter. The stove crackled, pots simmered with rabbit stew and dried onions, and the children dozed curled together like pups. Elias sat across from Clara, a cup of weak tea in his hands. "I ain't planning to stay," she said. He nodded. "Just need time to get well. Find work. A proper place." He nodded again. "I can sew," she said more defensively now. "Cook, clean. I work hard. I don't expect handouts." "I never said you did." She looked away, jaw clenched. "You're not doing this for charity, are you?" "No." "Then why—" Elias thought about it, about the long silence of his days before and the way Mabel had held her brothers in the cold, like she'd hold off death with her bare hands if she had to. About the stillness of Clara's face when she first opened her eyes again. About the sound of a child laughing after days of nothing but quiet. "I lost a lot," he said. "Years back. A wife, a son, a piece of land I thought I'd die on. After that I figured there wasn't much use left in me." He looked down at the floor, then back up at her. "But you showed up anyway. Sick and half dead with 3 kids and a girl too stubborn to give up. And I figured maybe yous don't come looking for a man. Maybe it waits for him to show up shovel in hand." Clara stared at him. Not coldly. Just long enough that he wondered if he'd said too much. Then she nodded. That was all. Days passed. The snow deepened, then melted back into earth. Elias taught Mabel to split kindling. She taught him how to fix a torn shirt with even stitches. Clara mended the curtains with scrap muslin she found in a trunk, and the place began to look like it belonged to someone again. The boys carved shapes into the frost on the window glass and raced each other barefoot through the rooms. When they laughed, it filled the rafters. Elias built a fence plank by plank, hammering in the early light, while Clara watched from the porch, coughing less with each morning. Mabel followed behind him, carrying nails, offering advice she was too young to give and giving it anyway. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, Clara stepped outside. Elias was sitting on the porch rail, watching the moon stretch across the trees. She joined him, arms folded against the cold. "I thought I'd never stop running," she said. "From one fire to another." "Maybe you stopped," he said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the key, laid it in his hand. "I think this is ours now." He didn't move, didn't speak, just closed his fingers around it, and that was answer enough. Spring came quiet. It didn't announce itself with color or fanfare, just the slow dripping of snowmelt off the eaves, the soft darkening of soil, the smell of damp pine in the morning. The river swelled with thaw, lapping higher along the banks, bringing with it the sound of movement, of something shifting, waking. Elias planted beans, not because he expected much. The ground was stubborn, full of rocks and memory. But his hands itched for work that stayed done, and Mabel insisted seeds needed hope more than certainty. Clara stitched a dress from old flour sacks, the seams, even the hem, neat. She'd gained weight color in her face now. Her hair was always tied back with care. She moved slow still, but not like she was wounded, more like she'd remembered how to carry herself. They found a rhythm. Mornings started with smoke from the chimney boots on floorboards, the boys wrestling on the porch until Mabel scolded them. Afternoons were filled with chores, small talk, laughter that sounded less borrowed with each passing day. There was no declaration between Elias and Clara, no confessions, no promises. Just the day she poured him coffee in the tin cup he always used, then handed it to him without looking like she'd been doing it for years. Just the morning she swept the porch while he sharpened his axe and asked if he wanted venison or beans for supper, as if it were always going to be her asking. And the night he left his rifle by the door, sat down at the table, and stayed long after the children had gone to bed. It was Mabel who spoke what none of them had dared. "We could stay forever," she said one evening, chin propped on her hand, elbows on the table. Clara gave her a look half worn, half soft. "Maybe not forever," she said gently, "but a while at least." Elias didn't say anything, just reached over and ladled another scoop of stew into Mabel's bowl. The fence held through the first storm. The roof didn't leak. The soil, against all odds, took the seeds and kept them. By June, green pushed up through the earth like it had always belonged there. And one night, when the air was thick with the smell of sage and wild grass, Elias stood in the doorway watching fireflies blink through the trees. Clara stepped up beside him, her fingers brushing his. He didn't move. She didn't pull away. Behind them, Mabel's laughter drifted from the back room, chasing her brothers through the dim house. "Feels like a beginning," Clara said. Elias nodded, slow. "It does." They stood in the doorway, not as guests anymore, not as strangers held together by weather and chance, but as something more. Not saved, not rescued, just together. And that was enough. The trail still calls. Subscribe and answer.